Now, this video just talks about the operating systems from a pretty much a GCSE perspective. So the operating system enables the computer to be usable. So basically you need an operating system to run the computer or to operate it. So if you get the question at GCSE level, what is the operating system for? What's the role of the operating system? Then it's to execute programs. So it's to make the system usable by the user. So it runs the system, if you like. So one of the things it does is to provide a user interface. Now, you have to be very careful these days with just saying the operating system provides a user interface, because the more important idea is that it hides the complex nature of the hardware. So what we mean by that is that you don't have to know how all of the computer works in order to run it. You don't have to know how the processor operates or how the memory operates or even how the hard disk or anything else operates, really, because the operating system hides that detail from us. So it hides the complexity. So if you remember that the operating system hides the complexity from the user, you won't go too far wrong. So that idea is abstraction. So you might have heard of abstraction, by removing details or removing complexity, helping a problem to be solved by removing details that we don't need to solve it. It's the same idea here, only in this case we're just allowing the computer to be used easily without knowing all of the technical aspects of how it works. So the operating system manages these functions, and you might get questions at GCSE that just say state what it does. So if it says state what it does, then any of these things are good. So it manages memory. So what we mean by that is that it manages where things are stored in RAM. So memory is the idea of RAM. Really, anything that's memory is either RAM, ROM, or cache, but memory management is usually managing where programs are stored in RAM, allowing them to be fetched into the processor, to be stored back into RAM, etc. So managing that area of RAM. Input-output device management. So this used to be referred to as peripheral management. So it's devices like printers, scanners, keyboards, etc. So allowing you to install new ones, to put drivers in for those, handling the inputs and the outputs to those types of devices is another thing the operating system does. So it manages applications, so it allows you to install new programs. So remember, programs are sometimes called applications. Better to use that full term applications, really, than just shorten it to the idea of apps if you can. So it also does processor management. So managing the processor, allocating time to running application programs. So I've said here see multitasking. So on my materials I've got another page for multitasking. So that means if we've got 7 or 8 or 10 programs running at the same time, it's going to switch them in and out of the processor, switching those back into RAM, back into the processor. Time slicing, it's sometimes called. So that could be called time slicing. So this idea of multitasking, it's slicing up the processor's time and allocating it to lots of different programs. So it might provide a bit of security as well, the operating system. Increasingly, operating systems have lots of add-ons, so you might get some antivirus and stuff too. But the main thing, provides user accounts or special access. So that special access could be an admin account. And that admin account might be allowed to install software and do lots more than just a general user account. So it also manages files and storage. So different to memory, memory's RAM, and that, as we know, loses its contents when the power gets turned off. But when we want to store longer term, we're talking about hard disks or SSDs, or any other means of storing long-term data, the operating system needs to manage that and where it is. So hard disks used to have something called a file allocation table, where that table maintained where all the files were stored on the hard disk and where the bits of files were stored so that they could be accessed. The operating system needs to keep an eye on that and know what's happening. So we've talked about user interface, so providing a user interface to hide the complexity from the user so that the user can use the computer without knowing everything about it. And finally, kind of network management. So it might well have some built-in network support. So the operating system is going to manage what's happening between your computer and the network. If you plug in, you might plug in a UTP cable, a universal twisted pair cable, into the back of your computer, and then the operating system is going to manage how that interacts with the network then. So the computer's likely to have a network interface card built in, and so the operating system will manage how that card interacts as well. So if they just say state what you want to do, then you can say any of these things. If they say you need to describe, you need to start to describe what happens, like I've just done when I've talked you through these, described how the memory is managed, how the input-output devices are managed by communicating with printers, by managing the outputs and the inputs, etc. How the applications are managed, install new programs, etc., allow them to run. So you need to talk a little bit further around that if it asks you to describe something. But if it just says state 3 or state 4 of them or whatever, then you can choose any of these. So I'd try and remember 2 or 3 or 4 of those for the exam and be able to write them down. So that's just a little bit about operating system.